What did I do that I enjoyed the most and I thought was most meaningful? And that led me to marriage and family therapy. So I did, during that interim time, I did 5 years at different congregations as an interim rabbi, first being at JRC here, and the last being back at Temple Sholem. So that's me, married 36 years, and okay, great. And I have 4 adult children, and looking forward to grandchildren. Hopefully they'll all get married, but as they wish. But the first one's getting married in June. So, as way of an introduction, Boker Tov, L'Rachok, L'Karov. Thank you again, Rini, for this opportunity. So we've already had in this room a expression of skepticism. One of our colleagues, who is among other things, has been a couples counselor. And you're not the only one. So I imagine many of you have read or maybe even studied with the late Edwin Friedman, our colleague and therapist, and author of the seminal book, Generation to Generation, where he applies family systems theory to congregations and to relationships with congregants. And I was at a few different seminars with him, and one in LA, at HUC in LA, I remember. And the one thing I remember as he was talking about life cycle is that he does not do premarital counseling. Why doesn't he do premarital counseling? Because he says it has no effect. He said couples are coming at each other at the speed of light. And as we know from physics, nobody else can catch up to the speed of light. And he may not be wrong, but I think it's worth the effort, because research has shown that indeed people who go to premarital counseling have better long-term relationships than those who don't. So looking at my script here. I also want to throw in the fact that research has also shown that those people who do go to premarital therapy or premarital counseling end up with in couples therapy more often than people who don't. So, before I continue with my presentation,
that's considered a good thing.
Well, that's my punchline. Well, you know.
Yeah.
Before I go into my presentation, Rini's going to address what I think is the most important thing to have part of premarital counseling, which is genetic testing, which can save the life of a child and save a couple from a lifetime of anguish. And I've seen it, and it's not pretty. So, Rini, you want to take over?
Sure. So I think those of us on the call and in the room are very familiar with the Sarnoff Center for Jewish Genetics, which is under it's its own organization, but it's under the umbrella of JUF. It's housed at JUF. Just wanted to give an extra plug to remind couples, and a message that they are trying to communicate more and more is that the work that they do is for Jewish couples. It's definitely for interfaith couples. It's for LGBTQ couples who might even be using donors. Anyone with an Jewish ancestry is more than welcome to take advantage of their services. They provide a comprehensive, low barrier screening program. It's not expensive. There's payment assistance. You can use insurance. And also, you don't even have to leave your house. It comes to you in the mail, and you use saliva. So it's a spit test, and you send it in. You do a 15-minute educational experience online that teaches you a little bit about genetics. And then you get your results, and the Sarnoff Center has a genetic counselor who's available to talk with couples after they receive their results. It tests for 260 conditions. It does not test for BRCA and other cancer mutations, just FYI. So a plug for the Sarnoff Center. They're always available to speak with rabbis, and they have materials you can give to couples, and just remember to mention that to couples. Thanks. Oh yeah, there you go, right there, Rabbi Mark.
Oh, there you are.
So Chi-Chi.
Yes. Well, Rabbi Mark Bertson, hello again, and Rabbi Mark Rudolph. I love your names because my oldest is Mark, also with a C, which is really the only right way of doing it. Okay, all right. So as I begin, I want to ask everybody a question. For those of you who are married or have been married, I want you to think about whatever premarital counseling you might have had. Remember who the officiant was. And my questions are, one, what were your expectations going in? And two, what were your takeaways? So you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself.
I wonder if anybody actually had that experience.
Okay, well, let's find out. Raise your hand if you had premarital counseling. Okay, Rivka, good for you.
Well, Rabbi Kroll, who was at the Loop Synagogue, married us, and he was our premarital counselor, and I was more observant of some sort than my husband. And I wanted to make sure that we had a, Jewish relationship in a Jewish home. And with the marital, it was premarital Jewish counseling. It was not therapy counseling. But we met with him several times and discussed what it meant to have a Jewish family, a Jewish home, and a Jewish life. And my husband was really into it, and he was not raised that way. And so we were able to create that for our family and our kids.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that obviously that meeting made a difference.
I think there were 2 or 3 meetings, yeah.
Okay, good. I'm sure you had a lot to do with it as well. So we'll come back to those expectations in a bit. And it's interesting that most of us, including myself, did not have any premarital counseling. I mentioned Rabbi Schwartz, who I grew up with in St. Paul and with whom I worked in Chicago at Temple Sholem. He was the main officiant, and he felt he knew me. And I don't know if he really did much premarital anyway. The fact that he spoke more about my family than we knew, and opposed to friends, a little awkward, but here we are after almost 37 years. So what I want to do today is offer you some tools for whatever premarital work you are doing, share some of the ways that I use the liturgy. I'm here from those of you who have obviously had experience and what you have used that you feel has been effective. Okay. Along the way, I'm going to share with you the second most important piece of advice that a premarital counselor can give, which research has shown that if heeded, has the greatest chance of having a positive effect on a couple's long-term marital happiness. Before we get to the wisdom of our tradition, I want to spend a good deal of time talking about matters physiological, with what sometimes is called the science of love. Especially speaking of those chemicals, those hormones which fuel the couple's warp drive that put them at the speed of light and cause, in the words of one writer, and microbiologist Catherine Wu, causes a total eclipse of the brain. I'm also going to spend time on what's called the life cycle or the stages of marital love. I'm going to share the physiological information, not so that you share it with couples, but so you can have some understanding of the people who are in front of you and what's happening in their hormonally energized brains, which will in many ways determine what they will hear and what they won't hear, and some of the things that they won't hear you say anyway. I'm addressing the concept of stages to gently share with couples what's coming ahead, the great, the troublesome, and the absolutely wonderful. My hope is that when they hit the almost inevitable stage, when they feel that marriage is just not working for them and love is gone, perhaps they might remember what you said about how love morphs over time and circumstance. And when it seems that love is gone, love can still abide. If they can work through that, and if they can endure this difficult stage without NPD, no permanent damage, and often that takes years, they may remember the faint echoes of the words of hope that you have given them, and will be motivated to know that the best is yet to come. We don't hammer that in too much because that's not what they came for. They came to talk about their wedding, not their marriage. They're not expecting to talk about or learn about married life, not necessarily, especially the negative stuff which they know in their hearts is never going to happen to them. I'm quoting now the marriage therapist Michelle Weiner Davis. She wrote books like Divorce Busting and Sex Starved Marriages. She wrote, "As a longtime observer of relationships, I can tell you that like children, marriages go through different developmental stages and predictable crises. But because people are unfamiliar with the normal hills and valleys of marriage, these predictable transitional periods are often misunderstood, causing overreactions. Those who manage to weather these stormy periods usually come out the other side with greater love and commitment to their spouses." So what are these stages of marital life? If you Google stages of marriage or marriage life cycle, you'll see a number of different theories. Some talk about 3 stages, some 5, some 7 or 8. I'm going to be referring to using a 3-stage model. Please note that we're talking in generalities. Each couple has its own journey. Having said that, I want to emphasize that research has showed that all these things that are happening physiologically and emotionally are equally true for gay couples and straight couples. Like the stages of grief, these stages are not always linear, but may overlap and blur. You know, love can be heaven and love can be hell, and often at the same time. So stage 1 involves attraction, infatuation, and romance. The romance stage is powered by the built-in drive which for the last few million years has pushed our species and others to attach to and procreate with another of their species. Stage 1 begins when the couple meets and feels attracted to one another and generally lasts for a few years into the marriage. That's the falling in love part. Falling in love is an apt description because whether you're falling in love or falling off a cliff, you have no conscious control, or let's put it this way, it's compromised. At no other time in your relationship is your feeling of well-being and physical desire for each other as intense as it is during this romantic period. The newness and excitement of the relationship stimulates the production of chemicals in your body that increase energy, positive attitudes, and heighten sexuality and sensuality. So what's going on in the brain in stage 1? Much of what I'm going to share comes out of the work of Dr. G.H. Larson and Dr. Helen Fisher, both of whom in the beginning of this century began using brain scans to examine the links between love and what's going on in the brain. During stage 1, the infatuation, attraction, romantic stage, love deactivates neural pathways connected to negative emotions, to fear, to social judgment. Chemicals associated with reward flood our brains, which result both in emotional and physical responses. Our hearts go racing, our palms get sweaty, our cheeks are flushed. We have heightened feelings of passion. Sometimes it's called lust, and of course, of anxiety. The anxiety comes from the fear of losing the object of your love. Will she find somebody else? Am I going to do something so stupid as she'll leave me? To tame this anxiety, levels of stress-relieving cortisol increase. At the same time, levels of the neurotransmitter serotonin decrease. Now, what happens when serotonin decreases? Well, that's when you get close to obsessive compulsive behaviors, and if it goes so low, well, that's a factor in addiction. So that should tell us something.
Depression, when serotonin is low, is that depression?
I think that's part of it. Mark, do you have a
I
sense?
think you just keep, yeah, I think you're on the right track.
Sorry.
Serotonin uptake has to do with depression, but that's what he's talking about.
And we all know about our cherished friend dopamine,
Mhm.
which makes us feel good and is released in high levels that heighten our good feelings. It makes us giddy, energetic, euphoric, perhaps decreasing appetite and sleep. Each time we look into our lover's eyes, we get a big dose of dopamine. Of great interest during stage 1, this is my favorite part, is a decrease in the activation of the frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex. That's where abide executive functioning, judgment, judgmentalism, and logic, all of which take a back seat when falling in love. Flaws in the other are ignored or overlooked, dismissed. One of the things that the prefrontal cortex does also is to maintain a distinction between self and others. I think my understanding that those people who go into deep meditation and find that they're one with the world, I think that's some of the things that are happening as well. So as that part of the brain takes a break, the distinction between two people in love may blur or disappear, and the couple feel like they're merging and experience a true sense of unity. At the same time, there's a decrease in the functioning of the amygdala, the small little almond part of the brain down deep that contains what we call the reptilian brain. That, as you know, is what triggers the fight, flight, or flee response when confronted with a perceived threat. So as the activation of the amygdala decreases, your guard comes down, so to speak, and with a less of an instinct to protect yourself, trust between lovers grows. It's amid the redistribution of brain energy and the hormonal maelstrom, all of which boost sexual attraction, empower unquestioning trust, promote merged oneness, ignore flaws and compromises judgment. In all those states, the couple decides to get married. And with or without the benefit of clergy, they say I do from the deepest resources of their heart because they really mean it. But as we know, in time, chemical drivers of romantic love begin to dissipate, and brain activity returns to normal, to homeostasis. In time, they realize that some things might have changed, or I made a mistake. Imperfections, once ignored or not recognized, all of a sudden grow sharper in focus. In the words, again, of Weiner Davis, after a while, the euphoria of stage 1 gives way to the inevitable earth-shattering awakening. Marriage isn't all what you expected it to be. So what's that stage 2 they talk about? Harris and Larson, in their research, describe stage 2 as a stage of disillusionment and distraction. Disillusion seeps in as a couple sees each other more as they are, often finding the person that they married is not exactly the person who's sitting across the kitchen table or lying next to them in bed. Married life, and more so with married with children, is subject to countless real-world distractions. The obligations and the demands of school, work, finances, children, community involvement, you name it, distract from the time and energy that couples might have had to spend with each other, to communicate deeply, nurture their marital friendship in and out of bed. Often this stage, there is a power struggle to see who can change the other. In the midst of all this pain, rejection, anger, and fear, I tend to doubt that they're going to remember how you said an eternity ago that love takes work, really, really hard work, which may involve learning different ways to communicate and finding ways to compromise and forgive. Sexual intimacy, something they couldn't get enough of in stage 1, becomes less and less frequent for a variety of reasons. Hormones have shifted. Often the lack of non-sexual intimacy lessens desire for physical intimacy. And what's non-sexual intimacy? It could be a touch, it could be a deep look, it could be sitting and really having a deep conversation that has nothing to do with anything practical, but just with each other. Partners, primarily women, are less interested in sex out of sheer exhaustion after a day of having to juggle the pressures of work, children, chores, and so much more. That leads men often to feel, she doesn't love me anymore. Even though he is loved, he ain't feeling it like he used to. At this stage, it feels like the cracks of the foundation of the relationship are simply too big to be fixed. Many don't get through this stage and become separated or divorced. Others continue in resignation or compromise contentment, meaning, okay, well, I guess this is the best I can do in life. But if they can look at what's really going on when their brains are no longer being flooded with emotions and once again, they have accessibility to rationality and empathy, which they lost when they get flooded, they may just remember your prediction that something like this is likely to happen at some point. Hopefully, they will recall your words that there are ways to get back either the relationship getting back on track, or that together they can lay down some new tracks. Sorry, that was only my future son-in-law. We just turn this whole thing on. That didn't work. So they can either get back on track or perhaps lay down other tracks, new tracks together. If they work on acquiring new relationship skills and ways of communicating, if they can nurture empathy and ways of communicating, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, if they can rebuild trust and commitment, hopefully it'll bring them to the more satisfying and productive, happier stage 3. Some call stage 3 the attachment, acceptance, and commitment stage. If anyone were to ask me, which they don't, I would call it the recovenanting stage. You arise out of stage 2, accepting and respecting your partner for who and what she is or isn't, annoyances and all. And you don't resent him for what he isn't and what he can't be. It's not that the messy stuff has been forgotten. It may have been moved to the back of the emotional scrapbook. It's there, but it's not up front. Or it's been forgiven. Perhaps it's been a result of what they call radical acceptance. Radical acceptance, people accept what they can and cannot change, tolerate the distress. Love looks beyond imperfections. Doctors John and Julie Gottman, who pioneers in their system in marriage counseling, doing research going back to the 1970s, they found that around 2/3 of all marital disputes never get solved. Whether or not the relationship thrives depends not on them trying to resolve the conflict with more of the same, but in the couple's commitment to finding ways of communicating about it, living with it, and dealing with whatever they can control as a team. As they say in narrative therapy, they learn that they're not the problem, the problem's the problem. Stage 3 doesn't come with the euphoria of the first stage, but finds a love built of attachment and commitment deeper than they had known before. The red flames of passion have died down, but not entirely. But in their place glow the white hot burning embers that in fact grow, give greater heat and burn longer. Passionate love can become compassionate love. In the brain, cortisol and serotonin have long since been stabilized, maybe not for other things, but the biochemicals in the brain are not done working with you, as they have in smaller ways and larger ways before. Endorphins and hormones vasopressin and oxytocin, vasopressin and oxytocin fill the body, which support one's overall sense of well-being, bolsters trust, commitment, long-term loyalty, and security, which undergird long-standing relationships. At this point, many can look back at the more difficult challenges that they've worked through, realize how not easy it was, but they did the hard work, and they look back with pride and a sense of accomplishment. So before I move on to the next thing, I just want to see what comments you might have, what questions you might have, some of which I may be able to answer, or Mark here may be able to answer. So questions about any of this so far?
Well, transition from the second stage to the third stage. It's just something that happens, or it's something that some process they need to go through to get there.
Well, first of all, the question is, how do you get from stage 2 to stage 3? Is it a process? Obviously, it's different with different couples. It takes years. And I think it can be a number of different factors. Of course, couples therapy really helps. Plug. So, for instance, I had one couple who resolved their issues, and she said, you know, I came in knowing that he was the problem. And what I learned is the good outcome depended on me changing. So, but if they're able to do the work, tolerate those difficult times, again, find ways of communicating that are more akin to I statements than you statements. If they can try not to be defensive when they feel they're criticized, because maybe when they're being criticized, they think they're being criticized, they're really not. There are a lot of different factors that can go into it. Mark, what's your experience been?
Gosh, so many things that you're talking about kind of stir things up with me. I don't know if everybody knows that, you know, before I was a rabbi, I spent 20 years in community mental health and private practice. So I did my share of marital counseling, and I've been in my share of marital counseling as well. And I think the thing personally, and also I think that helps the couples. And I love John Gottman. I've been to, you know, I'm a big fan of his and his wife, Julia's. Seems to me that the thing that's helpful, I mean, I thought it was very interesting that you said 2/3 of the time the problems don't, you know, that it's not resolved.
I didn't say that, Gottman.
Gottman, only 2/3 of the time. I mean, 90% of the time. You know, but I think what happens is that couples simply get frustrated with each other and stop talking. That's a form of intimacy. Small talk is a form of intimacy. You can't stand being in the same room with each other if things have gotten to such a. So one of the things that I found, I never solved anybody's marital problems, and nobody ever solved my wife's and my issues either, which still are there. But the fact is that we can kind of continue to talk and continue to have a relationship and deal with those issues when they come up every once in a while. And, you know, we've been married for almost 40 years. So,
Fantastic.
well, yeah,
That's a goal.
so I think keeping open communication, even when that communication means, you know, fighting with each other at a certain level.
Mhm.
Sometimes that level gets too high and that's becomes destructive. But seems to me that that's the most helpful
Mhm.
thing. The other thing I'm thinking about is, you know, those couples that, you know, are in that second stage, you know, the disillusionment stage. There's so much, you know, goes on in life to keep a relationship going. And then at the end, when their kids are in their 20s, they divorce. And I've had friends who that's happened to, and people I've known, and gee, you know, you got through the hard part. Now, you know, you're they never make it to that
Mhm.
stage where they can tolerate. Perhaps the damage is too great in that middle stage. But those are simply the thoughts that I've had. And I agree with you. I mean, it would be wonderful if somebody could look back at that time with their rabbi and say, you know, and just evoke it in some way. I never have couples. I don't know if other people have this also. I'm the last person to know when a couple divorces
Sure.
in my congregation. Nobody has come to me. And they know my background. I mean, I have it up there on the website. Nobody has come to me and said, you know, we're having problems in our relationship. We want to talk. Actually, that's not 100% true. Just recently, somebody did come to me.
Okay.
They only came to me once, and they didn't want to come to me again. Sometimes sitting down and talking to your rabbi can be helpful, I think, even if you don't pursue, you know, therapy. But nobody, very, very rarely has somebody come to me. I just hear about it later.
Yeah. In my experience.
So it's interesting that, you know, maybe if they had a helpful, I don't know what that's about either. You think that people would come.
Yeah. And by the way, just to underline what you said, I've dealt with many couples that had different problems, but most of them come saying we need help with communication, and they know that. Other questions or comments? Yes, Rivka.
I'm not a therapist, but I guess I'm a human being, and I have a lot of experience with friends and family, and I guess maybe women talk to each other maybe more than men do. And I also do mindfulness meditation, have groups. And I find that this second stage, I think this is, for me, it's more about the individual facing their career, their marriage, their hopes, their dream. For me, there's so much individual work that needs to be here. And suffering is really when you want something that's other, where you can't accept what is. And for me, a lot of my friends who have been disillusioned, who are thinking of getting divorced, and when they work on themselves, not thinking it's the other person, but maybe there's something they need to work on in their lives of where they are and what's making them feel stuck, they get to a different place in their own sense of being, and they can, because you just put two people together and say communicate and whatever, get over. But you know, when you work on yourselves and then you come together and realize that, you know, rather than blaming the others, some of this comes from a sense of ill-being within oneself. And I found that the people who make it through, you know, different means, whether it's meditation, medication, or counseling and therapy, you know, get to another side too, rather than always trying to make people work it out together. You know, I think it takes a lot of self-work to be a compassionate human being in this world today.
Thank you. You reminded me that there are many therapists who believe before marital counseling, each one needs to be an individual counseling. I don't find that marriage and family therapists say that necessarily, but your point is very well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with Rivka also. But the fact is that people do come to us with couples counseling, and they do see the problem in the other person. And if you say, well, you each need individual counseling. I had my wife and I have had our share of individual counseling also, by the way. We're big consumers of this service. And our children, by the way, also. And we're pretty good, we're very good parents, but you know, you have to sometimes give people what they think they need, because they won't go to individual counseling. And there is some work to be done with couples. My wife is a psychotherapist also, has MSW. She doesn't do couples counseling at all, but she only does individual counseling. But she will she will send people for couples counseling, and it's an, you know, everything has its place.
Yeah. Well, a number of the, not all, maybe not even the majority, but a number of the individuals within the couples that I'm seeing as couples also are doing their individual therapy.
It's all good. It's both is helpful. I'm not saying either or. I think if you're in both, is really helpful for people.
No question. No question about that. Other thoughts or questions?
I just have a thought, thinking about kind of the Jewish community and the infrastructure that we offer people. After you get married, a lot of couples aren't necessarily affiliated with a community. And I think that can be a hard time in terms of making new friends as couples. That's what I'm thinking about, is how can our kind of Jewish ecosystem reach out to these couples in ways that how can congregations maybe do a better job of introducing recently married couples to each other? You know, something like Honeymoon Israel does a good job, but that's not for everyone. Not everyone goes on that. So I just think it's something for us to think about.
Absolutely. Just have young couples clubs. Back my folks were created one back in the late 40s. Mrs. Club.
There used to be marriage encounters.
My parents did that.
In my mother's and father's generation, people got a lot out of that.
But a young rabbi, I remember, there was we had a group at the first congregation I was in, where there was a young couples group.
And many congregations have that. Or what I've found with many of those, I want to call it developmental stage, that they have a cohort, and they kind of, if they stick together, it's like a chavurah, they have a cohort that they stick with, but not necessarily being open to new couples. That's, you know, and also in grief therapy, that's an issue. Okay, so I want to bring it back to your office or your Zoom connection. The couple's primary agenda, I believe, in coming to you, is to plan the wedding of their dreams. Yes, they do the Jewish stuff that Jews do when the Jewish people get married, and they'll want to know about what it means and what they're doing. But they also make sure that their wedding is totally unique and personal, since of course nobody has ever been in love like they're in love. In their minds, they're coming to you for short-term planning, what will take place under the chuppah, while you may want to address the long-term agendas of creating deep Jewish life, which takes place under their roof, and help them maintain a healthy long-term relationship. So how do we address our agenda as well as theirs? First of all, and you probably don't need me to tell you this, but research has found that the first meeting that you have with them is crucial. For research has shown that the long-term positive effect of marital counseling depends on the relationship they develop with their premarital counselor. It's not so much what we say, it's how we listen, how deeply we listen and recognize and respect them as individuals and as a couple. This, of course, impacts on how comfortable they are in opening up and sharing their messy stuff. Since talking about the messy stuff is the last thing they want to talk about, in her chapter on premarital counseling in the book Pastoral Care, a Practical Handbook, my friend, colleague, and my chosen supervisor for my work with CCAR suggests that the way to begin a pastoral alliance in a safe and sacred space is to get them to talk about issues they may have around the wedding, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, and the sources of tension they may be experiencing. This can possibly set the stage for seeing you as a person with whom they can speak openly, and then, of course, learn from your teaching and your way of being that Judaism has something to offer to them as a married couple. They find that they can share their excitement, their joy, their anxiety, their hate, their fear, and their hope with an attentive and accepting person who authentically conveys not judgment, but empathy, caring, and compassion. And here's the thing, if they're comfortable sharing their stuff with you, there's a greater chance that they'll go to another individual to share when later on things are not going as well as they expected to be. So here is, according to the research, the most important advice, the second most important advice you can give a couple, just as I did to my daughter and her fiance just recently, and what Mark intimated. Research has found that those who go to premarital counseling are more likely to end up in couples therapy afterwards, not because people who have had premarital counseling have more problems than others, but they've since found it comfortable and helpful to open up to another individual and talk about the messy stuff. They were open to it before, and so they're more likely to seek help now. And that in turn increases their chances of getting through stage 2 and getting to stage 3. Turning to the ceremony itself, Rabbi Lewis suggests offering a couple a spiritual framework with which to give spiritual meaning to what they're doing. She proposes 3 frameworks: 1, the Mikdash Ma'at; 2, the Sinaitic Covenant; and 3rd, the I-Thou relationship. If you want to know more about that, you can read the chapter, or if you want to email me, I can send you those pages. I've preferred to frame the wedding a little differently, with some overlap, the wedding and the relationship in the sense of Kiddushin, of holiness, as suggested by Kiddushin, which means both, refers to both the first ceremony and the state of being married. So when you ask what holy means, often they say sacred. And when they ask what sacred means, they say holy. And so I open up with my understanding of what the biblical idea of the holy is. So we start with the creation story, first one. God makes the 6 days, calls them good. The whole thing is very, very good. And then God rests on the 7th day, declaring it not good, but holy. Other days are good, but this day is set apart from the others. The nature of the day is defined by God's participation in it. God rested, therefore we rest. So not only is Shabbat set apart from the others, it's also elevated to godly purposes. Then I jump to Leviticus, our favorite book, and give a simplistic concept of Hekdesh, not going into like Hekdesh Bedek Habayit or Hekdesh Mizbeach. I talk about the cow which, when declared Hekdesh, becomes dedicated as an offering to God and can no longer be used for ordinary self-serving benefit. And then I speak about the field, maybe the part of a vineyard which has been declared Hekdesh. Once declared holy, there's a boundary created around the field which cannot be crossed. Hands off, everybody, this field is taboo. If one violates the boundary, the holiness of the field is compromised, if not destroyed. Not respecting the boundaries of the holy, by the way, the violator could be put in grave danger. Just ask Nadav, Abihu, and Uzzah, which of course you can't because God zapped them. So I bring these definitions together as I explain the meaning of being consecrated to another, mikudash, mikudeshet li, as it applies to them. With words of consecration and being encircled with a ring, he or she is being set apart for a godly purpose. As I speak the words, or they speak the words, or as one speaks the word mikudash or mikudeshet li, they're saying, my beloved is being told that they are unique in the world, that there's no one in the world for me but you. Like the 6 days of the week, which are good, others in my life, I love, I cherish them, but you're elevated to a different level in the nature, quality, indeed the holiness of our love. I then turn to the cow, which once declared hekdesh cannot be exploited or used for anything less than a godly purpose. Being married is not about the other deriving benefit. A benefit will certainly accrue. It's not about what he does for her or she does for him. It's about what they can be and how they can grow and work together to build a life and ultimately a dedicated home. It's no longer about falling in love. It's about rising in love and serving a purpose, a godly purpose, perhaps something beyond themselves. And then I return to the field, whose boundaries cannot be violated. And we talk about the boundaries they feel to be essential, both between them and others and between themselves. Love without rules, as you know, or boundaries, remains vulnerable, perhaps even unsustainable. Referring to the danger of violating the boundaries of marriage, I speak of how there's a level of intimacy, both physical and emotional, that can only be shared with each other. If that which is taboo, which is them now, is either violated, they may destroy the sacredness of their relationship, probably forever, but not necessarily. It certainly has that potential, and they have to work really hard to rebuild trust and commitment. As the bride circles the groom, or they circle each other, they're representing with their bodies the boundaries which separate them from all others. I remember reading in the book Ever Since Sinai by our teacher, Dr. Jacob J. Pedachowski, of blessed memory, that Hare At translates with this ring, I'm taking you out of circulation. So the rings too are a physical reminder that there are boundaries which cannot be crossed. Of course, that's the furthest thing from their minds at this point. At least I think so, at least I hope so. I know that each of you could stand here and impart the wisdom you have acquired and then shared with couples about how aspects of the liturgy can broaden and enrich couples' lives and Jewish lives. And our conversation today could last until we take out the feather and the candle. But we have lives. So I want to devote time to what I think is the most potent symbol of a Jewish wedding, which is the breaking of the glass. This is an act which is a symbol. And we know that a symbol can acquire a myriad of meanings and evoke different beliefs, ideas, and of course, emotions. Again, our teacher, Dr. Pedachowski, spoke of the fallacy of origins, that the meaning of something is not limited to the reason it came to be. So before I venture into how I use the breaking of the glass to speak to the real lives of the couple, I want to hear what you have found to be most potent meaning of the act as you relate it to couples. So what's the most important understanding that you share with couples about the breaking of the glass?
Well, I mean, often what I've said, and this doesn't necessarily relate to the couple as to the experience of the wedding itself. So this may not have lasting implications at all. and this is not original to me by any means, but that part of the protective moment or ideal moment of the wedding and the chuppah and the sense of protection and sacred time and transcending time and being in the Garden of Eden and liturgy, here we, having echoes of Sinai, of evoking moments in the Sheva Brachot of creation and redemption. It's as if the couple is really standing at this almost, they're in this liminal time, which is caught between everything. And then with the breaking of the glass, you shatter that moment. It's a moment of shattering that moment that then allows them to enter into regular time and life, now as a married couple. So that's what I've used in describing, and I heard this. I can't footnote it at the moment. I should be able to. But it's not original to me.
No, I like that a lot. One might think as shattering the moment of chuppah, and it starts their entrance from the Garden of Eden back into the real world. Right. And you know what the world is, and you know what can happen with people. Thank you, Michael. Neil, you had something you wanted to add?
Yes, I always like to say that into as many pieces as you break the glass, may you have an equal number of years, too many to count, to be each other's beloved.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's what I do. Of course, I always refer to what I experienced in Jerusalem when the groom says, "Imesh kachef Yerushalayim," let my right hand forget its cunning, let my strength forsake me. I always speak about the significance of the breaking of the glass as an exclamation point to their love, which we pray will grow and develop over the years.
Oh, thank you. Rini, you wanted to?
Yeah, I don't know where I got this from, but I often talk about the glass as a reminder that there are places in the world that are broken, and that when two people find each other and commit to one another, that brings healing to the world. And that's kind of my place to help them see that their relationship is more than just about the two of them, but kind of what you were trying to say is, as a team, how can they bring their best to the world?
Some, yeah, and I often do this, along those same lines.
You tested one?
Okay, just want to just mention briefly. Along those same lines, sometimes I briefly tell them about the Shvirat HaKelim and the brokenness of the world and the act of tikkun. And so, if this, in that sense, they are recreating, that shattering moment. And the idea is, and the fact that they're wedded is an act of tikkun, and then they have messianic potential, which is in fact what the implication is of the seven brachot. So yes, Steve.
I've got about 4 things in my wedding book that I let the couple choose from. One kind of like, as difficult as it is to put the glass back together, may be that hard to shatter your marriage. But in dealing with telling the pseudo origin story of the wedding in Jerusalem, that we have both an obligation to celebrate in the midst of the brokenness of the world. And in the midst of our joy, we need to be conscious of the brokenness of the world and not divorce ourselves from it, to weave together the pair of things.
Wow, nice. Others? I want to see if somebody else wants to go who hasn't gone yet. Neil, go back to Neil. Oh, you're muted.
What I've done is I would ask if they were both sets of parents, I would ask for how many years they were married, and then I would add them up together and wish the couple an equal number of years and tell them after they achieve that, we'll renegotiate. As a Purim stick, just to lighten the load before the breaking of the glass.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That's my gematrias, my
That'll-
shtick.
I'm sure that brings a smile. So, Rivka, you unmuted yourself?
Oh, I was just going to say something similar, but to be able to hold in the midst of our joy, the sorrows that befall us, like in the Mishnah, where we have to bless God for the good and the bad and be able to hold them all together and remember that in the fullness of our lives, there's more good than bad, but to always remember that, you don't turn away from the brokenness, but you hold it and thank God for all of it.
So obviously all of us are aware of one of the big traditional explanations, which is Zecher the Mikdash, remembering the destruction. And sometimes I talk about that in terms of it not being a broken world, there being a broken world to fix, but it also the Jerusalem image, which then goes back again to the seventh bracha, is they're part of Jewish history. And what they're doing is really an affirmation of Jewish future. If they choose to have children and are so blessed, then they are providing for a Jewish future, please God, boo, boo, boo. And if not, there are other things that they may do, supporting institutions that continue Jewish life. And so, it's not just them and their families, but the Jewish people has a stake in what's happening there. One of the quote, Suzanne, good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah, thanks. I just had a question, if you don't mind. I love that, talking about the couple being part of the Jewish future. And the first thing that popped into my head is, and part of Jewish history, would you say that to an interfaith couple too? And, I'm kind of curious, about how all this, maybe similar, maybe different, if it's an interfaith couple or a couple both of whom are Jewish.
Well, first of all, I do intermarriages sometimes, and the big thing is whether or not they make a commitment to establish a Jewish home, so that allows me to make that explicit. I do recognize, explicitly that they both come from families who have given them rich traditions and ethics and values that will be part of their married life. There's something else I wanted to say, but
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the quote origin meanings, and I'm sure this is true, right, is that breaking the glass scares away the demons. Okay. I like how my teacher, Dr. Ezra Spicehandler of blessed memory, framed people's beliefs in demons. People believed in demons like we believe in germs. If they're out there, you can't see them, but they're there. And if you don't take the proper precautions, they will cause damage. They will hurt you, undermine you. Demons like to, as Michael referred to, like to get to us in the cracks of our lives, in the liminal moments. That's when something isn't what it used to be, but isn't quite yet what it's going to be. In those spaces, step on a crack, break your mother's back. That's not a good thing. Liminal moments are found in transitions of time and in personal status. So time, like going from one year to another, personal status between going from unmarried to married. It's in these transitional moments which make us vulnerable to the devilish designs of the demons as they squirm through the cracks of our lives.
Mhm.
Of course, it's not difficult to protect yourself from demons. They're very skittish, and they get scared away by loud noises. They're also scared away or kept out of your house or your library or your church. They get scared away by things like gargoyles or lions at the front gate. So going back to like the transition between an old year and the new year, what does Chinese culture do at the moment of entering the new year? Fireworks, firecrackers, until Giuliani said you couldn't do that anymore. Dragons are good, scare away the demons. Okay? What do we do in our Western culture? Well, church bells, but also, the ball, reaches its destination, and what do? Happy New Year! Ooh, ooh, poppers, all that kind of stuff. We make noise, obviously, to scare away the demons.
On the show for honor, Rosh Hashanah.
So far, Rosh Hashanah. Good point. Because I used to think that we were kind of not into that stuff. We're not into superstition, by the way. But everybody else has superstitions. We have folklore. There's a superstition. Ours is folklore. Okay. So yeah, most of the time we associate the shofar with the Isle Har and all of that kind of stuff. But when you look at things like Rosh Hashanah 16b, Hulin 105b, and Rashi on Rosh Hashanah 28, you'll find that there were those who believed that the sounding of the shofar had the effect of confounding Satan and scaring away the demons. Okay, so here's the punchline. I believe in demons.
Eating the demons, it seems like people would always have to bring their bread to Tashli, and the rabbis said, don't do it. And originally breaking the glass was a kosher bracha with the wine in it. You were giving the demons something to drink. To
appease them. Yeah, appease them. Maybe get them drunk. That goes someplace else.
We were just studying about pouring the blood on the side of the altar, and to cover it up so the demons actually aren't going to come and drink it, because Maimonides says that they drank blood, that they would the pagans would pour aside their blood and leave it open so the demons could join people in eating. It's eating their meats and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, Rabbi Dr. Maimonides, the rationalist, believes in demons.
That's what he does.
I guess I'm in good company. Because I know that there are things that are often unseen that, if not handled correctly, can bring harm to loving relationships. There are the internal demons of things like selfishness, criticism, contempt, low self-esteem by one, really too high self-esteem in another. Dozens of other things which unintentionally can sabotage our relationships. There are some external things, demons, that come from things that are actually good or can be good. Things like time and money and sex. These are things that can turn demonic if not identified and addressed. All of them are great to have, sex, time, and money, but when the couple finds that they don't have as much as they used to have, disputes over lack of time and the lack of sex can cause great sphirot between the couple. Putting demons in that context opens the door to discuss the importance of budgeting. Not that we're great budgeters, some of us are, some of us aren't. And also allow for the conscious allegation of time for each other. And of course, let them know that love without sex is still love. it just took a different form. Another wonderful thing, which occasionally can jeopardize relationships, is family, especially family, parents and others, parents who have really good intentions, parents whose intentions they think are good, but maybe are more self-serving. That might open them to discuss how their parents are playing, the role they're playing in the wedding and planning, and in their lives. Not to be too gross, but one couple I married, it really upset her that when he was in his house of origin, where his mother was, he'd leave the door open while he pished. And that's okay for mom to see. And she's saying, well, not anymore. And
It is worse than leaving the toilet seat on.
oh gosh, oh gosh. And then, of course, when we're talking about parents, it swivels us back to the idea of boundaries. Sometimes one member of the couple wants to set boundaries with parents, usually the other parents, which the other won't or can't enforce. The parents, of course, are not demons. They're doing what they think is in the best interest of their child, but the resulting tension between parents and the couple, or between the couple themselves, can certainly have demonic effects on the relationship. So when the couple breaks the glass and scares away the demons, they're saying, in effect, that they and not anything else or anyone else, we're taking responsibility for our marriage. They recognize, at least to an extent, the effect that external and internal demons might have. And if chas v'chalil, the marriage doesn't work out, it's not anyone's fault except their own. Yes.
Yeah. When we're doing some of the stuff in my premarital counseling and we're talking about relationships with the family, I learned a wonderful lesson from my wife very early on that I share with couples. I used to talk about coming back to Chicago as going home. My wife reminded me that home is where we live.
Yes.
Going back to see your parents.
Yeah.
And to shift the definition of where home is.
Yeah, I remember a moment when I was taking a shower early on and thinking about going other places. And then I realized that my fiance was home. I mean, right, Talmud refers to a wife as bayit in a sense. That wherever she was, that was my home. So I think that's great advice. Where the heart is. Other thoughts? Other questions?
I'm just wondering how much couples, you said they can't hear all of this at the time. Yeah, there's just so much that we wish they could hear.
I'm just not hearing and remembering but more the emotional experience of a rabbi connecting some of these things which seem so distant from me, especially in today's world. But just the emotional experience of sitting with a rabbi who's connecting these things with the tradition is what's important, because we really don't remember most of what we, you hear a sermon, you don't remember your sermons from like last week, what you said, but there's an emotional component here, I think, which is very powerful beyond the content.
Yeah. Of knowing that there's a lot of meaning to what you're doing.
I can't remember what he said, but I remember the feeling I had when I.
But I think we have to be careful about the content too, because I've been astonished over the course of time of congregants reminding me of things I said in sermons that I don't ever remember saying, and couples reminding me of something in particular that happened during premarital counseling that they saved throughout their marriage.
Yeah.
And that as much as the feeling and the whole experience is important, the content also matters.
Sure.
Right, and as I'm sure all of us have learned, congregants are going to hear what they are afraid we're going to say, even if we don't say it. And the words that we speak is not the sermon. The sermon is what they hear and understand and how they process it, which may be totally in line of what your intention was or not. Right? Yes, Rivka.
I really loved what you said about sharing the idea that you're part of the Jewish history and the continuity of Judaism, because, you know, even people who are extremely secular, when they come and they talk to a rabbi, I remember one of my relatives wanted a really Jewish wedding, even though they were totally non-observant, but they wanted a really Jewish wedding. I was not the rabbi, but I remember they were talking about this. And even the ceremony was so packed with references to Judaism and liturgy and meaning and symbols, because they really wanted to connect. And I feel like if they're coming to talk to you, maybe they, it's not so much about coming to talk to you about therapy and their marriage, but that idea of being part of something and connecting, I thought was very powerful. Thank you for that, to remind us, even if it's all like Passover, you're connecting, you're a chain in the link, like the first Pirkei Avot, you're the chain in the link of the continuity of everything. And, to feel that connected is really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Other thoughts?
I think I will remember. I don't remember everything. When you just said that congregants hear what they're afraid you'll say.
Yeah.
That to me had a lot of resonance. I've been thinking about that. I never thought about it that way. So thank you for that.
Oh.
Yeah.
And a couple came to meet to get married, and the fellow.
Can you?
A couple came to me to get married, and they reminded me, actually, the groom, I guess, reminded me that I'd met with him once before with another woman. They had come together, and and they were not. She was not Jewish, and he wanted me to explain to them why Judaism has this problem with intermarriage. I don't remember exactly what I said to him, but whatever it was, seemed to have broken up the couple after a period of time. And he came back now. He says, "Here's my Jewish fiance. I'd like you to marry us," which is sort of, I almost fell over it. They hear that. You never expect that to happen. So you never know what the impact of the things you say.
Oh, God.
I have a question, which maybe is for the end, but I'll just ask you.
We're basically at the end. I just have one more thing to share.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I have had the experience, and I didn't know what to do, where I wanted to, I was nervous, or something seemed not quite right. And I thought it might be helpful if I met with either partner alone, which I never did, because I felt like that was a kind of a violation of their partnership. What have you done in a situation like that, where you just think something's not being said or something's not quite right? Do you ever meet individually with the two people?
I haven't really. There's only one couple. I think it was in Chicago, where I refused to marry them because, they were constantly arguing, which arguing is not a bad thing. I worry more about the couple that doesn't argue, right? But it just wasn't. It just didn't feel right. I recently did a wedding, which I would rather have not done, but it was for a cousin.
For what?
For a cousin.
Cousin.
Right. And then I guess I learned this more as a therapist. You have to, I'll finish this, and Suzanne had a comment, that people have agency. People have a right to make their own decisions about their lives and live with the consequences. So So let me just look at,
What is it? I don't understand what your point is. Don.
oh, my point is,
That you could have said no, is that what you're saying? Or when you say.
well, in this case, I couldn't have said no, okay? And that was my rationale for not saying no. Okay. I heard from a couple that meeting individual with the parent is part of the structure of prepare and enrich. That's one thing I was going to mention. I have used, that was from Suzanne. I have used prepare enrich for a long, long time. If you're not familiar with it, actually, hang on a second. Quote, it adapts and reacts to the changing reality of relationships through continued research and development of assessment versions and resources. The reliability of assessment and feedback guided by our facilitators help couples strengthen and enrich their relationships. And so that's kind of a survey-based thing to see if they're on the same page with each other on a variety of things. There's one thing, there's one category in which they might be on the same page, the same level, you know, this is a number 5, and they're wrong. That has to do with unrealistic expectations. You know, agree or disagree, we will have we'll never have problems in our relationship. So, sorry. So, yeah, Steve.
Going back to doing weddings or not doing weddings. I only had one wedding that I was really sorry I did. He was mentally ill and she thought she could mother him through and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
But what I say to couples is I'm not God and I don't know how your relationship is going to work out, but I'm going to listen attentively and lovingly. And I'm going to share with you any red flags that I notice so that you can be aware of them to work on them in the future. But I will agree to do your wedding unless it is something absolutely horrendous.
Yeah.
I think there are times when it's legitimate to meet with couples individually. The one thing I think about is if you suspect there's some kind of physical abuse going on,
right,
and that they won't tell you about that, but you have something's wrong here, then I think it's absolutely essential that you meet with at least, well, if it's the man who's abusing a woman, that you meet with her and explore that, if you know, because that's serious stuff.
I believe that prepare and enrich also addresses that.
Prepare and enrich in your own words. I don't understand.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a program of premarital counseling. So they take a survey.
They is
the couple.
oh, okay.
They take a survey separately. They push the button and sends it back to the home office in Minneapolis. And then you get a report that comes back and rates them in terms of where they are in various scales. This one is more outgoing, this one is more shy. This one is confident of their finances, so is this one. So you get two things. You get a feedback in a couple's workbook, in a sense, or pamphlet, a readout. It doesn't have everything, and then you get one that has all their answers. The two couples I'm marrying over the summer both scored very high. They were called vitalized couples. Okay.
Scored high in like compatibility.
In that they were on the same page.
Okay.
Stuff, you know. And they were attending to certain things. Now, what you do is then you can do this in one session or myriad of sessions, and they have materials if you want to focus on session on budgeting or communication, whatever. But you look through it, and it ranks these various things that here's a relationship strength. here's an area in which it's a potential strength. Here is an area which is potentially a growth area. And then here are things which are definitely growth areas. And first, we ask them to rate these various things and what they think are growth areas and strength areas. And then that for me is the way to start getting into the conversation.
Do you use this as a tool?
And Suzanne, do you use Prepare Enrich?
So I don't personally, I really don't work with couples who are getting married, but the person I'm mentoring actually through the CCAR, HUC mentoring program, works at a congregation where they use it. And so she's using it with couples.
And one needs training to do this. And certainly rabbis, cantors, therapists, other ministers, those are the kind of people that they train.
So it's a psychological test.
It's essentially a psychological test. Gottman's have something much more extensive. So as I was preparing for today and reflecting back on my experience and couples I've had, I came up, this isn't quite finished yet, and I don't think I'll ever use it, the vows that I'd really like to have the couple say, I do too. So it's based on what's in the maybe old rabbis, Reform rabbis manual. So I would say, do you, Plony, take Plonit to be your wife, promising to cherish and protect her in good times and in bad, through sickness and health, through pain and adversity, through harmony and discord, through ruby red anger and stone cold silence, through substance and through subsistence, through sharing and through sacrifice, through family functions and family dysfunctions, through holding it back and letting it go, through annoying habits and willed acceptance, through budgets and through sprees, through sexy and through sexless, in joy and in trauma, in empathy and in indifference, through conflicts and forgiveness, in loyalty and integrity, in honesty and in kindness, in achievements and in mistakes, and communication and more communication, and to seek together a life hallowed by the faith of Israel, and if so, say, I do.
Okay, 3, 4, 7, 6. Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
But I'm not going to use that. But that's,
What is that? 3, 4, 7.
Saying he would pick and choose some of that.
Yeah. But you don't have couples exchange vows, do you? I mean, that's not part of a Jewish wedding.
I do. And it's in the rabbi's manual.
You just said you did.
I do. That's right. There is a Jewish precedent for it from the 19th century, I think, because there's the whole idea that a woman cannot be married without her consent, right? And so this is a way that everybody knows that she is consenting to this. The other thing that I think is important is because of our culture. There may be people who, if they don't say, I do, maybe think they don't. So I give them the option. I read them what's in the book. I say, this is what's in the book, and we can change it, modify it. We can throw it out the window. They can write their own vows or other things that they found. It can be in the form of question and answer. Do you, blah, 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 blah. I do. Or it can just be a simple statement of commitment to each other. So it doesn't necessarily have to have the I do's, but couples want it.
The fact is that a lot of couples say, could I write my own vows? And we always say, of course, you can write your own vows. So
I haven't had that many people do it.
really,
My sense is they just don't want to have another thing on their plate.
Yeah.
So,
well, if they ask, I'm just saying.
absolutely. I make that offer, and
them help write the wedding talk. I asked them to each write something about the other, about what attracted you to this person, what is it, something like that.
Yeah.
And always incorporate that into the talk.
It's talking about asking the couple to write down what attracted them to each other, and the nature of their relationship.
Sometimes they'll write something that will be in the ketubah too. I've had couples write.
But one of the things that Gottman's, I've gone to a couple of trainings with them, and one of the things they said about, when you sit down with a couple, it's very interesting. Ask them how they first met, and if they all of a sudden, they liven up and they begin talking about their first dates and what attracted them, and they really, then there's a spark left to work with. But if they sit there and they, don't have any emotional reaction, then that's a very bad sign that the relationship is really dead, because there's not even a spark to work with them. That always stuck with me.
It's
How many
fun
sessions do you
and
do with couples?
I usually do 3 sessions. The first is when we get to know each other, and then I go through the ceremony and give them various options. The third, closer to the wedding, is when I have this kind of discussion. One of my main questions, a few questions. One is, I know you love this person. What do you like about them? I don't ask what annoys you, probably should. One of the questions I ask is premised on the idea that the family they're going to create is in many ways being shaped by the family in which they were raised. Most of the time, this is what was normal for me, so this is what I'm going to have. Or here's how I was raised. I didn't like it. It was dysfunctional, so I'm going to make an effort to do this. And also sometimes I put in a simple question, which Rabbi Chuck Roloff used, which is, how do you settle your differences? And that can get into, some good stuff. Other thoughts?
What's the second meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. The second meeting is when I go through the prepare and enrich stuff.
Oh, okay.
And what I tell them is this talk about the prepare and enrich stuff is bracketed in one meeting, meaning it's not going to have any impact on what happens under the chuppah. I'm not going to say, well, we know from the survey that you. So on Prepare and Rich, so years ago in New Jersey, I had a couple who scored 30% on Prepare and Rich. That's not good. Not a good sign. They argued all the time. They loved each other. I married them. And a few times walking through the streets, I'd bump into them with a baby carriage, and once with a kid at hand and another baby carriage. It worked for them. That was their way of being together. So, yeah.
Prepare and Rich, is it Jewish? Is there a Jewish frame to it, or it's a secular thing?
It's a secular thing that has, they can do this because it's all computerized, that has questions which are switched out for Jewish relevance.
Oh, okay.
So they do that. They also have one when there's a couple coming from different cultures.
Oh,
yeah, but you can definitely do the Jewish version.
Dr. Koff,
Oh,
thank you so much.
Into you. Thank you for this.
This was great.
A lot to think about. A lot to think about.
Oh, and there's a few couples who want to get married.
Yeah, really. And I guess that's not happening as much as it did. So
Doesn't happen.
That's an interesting topic too. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to Don
Great.
Rossoff. There will be a recording of this that I'll send out to everybody. And please look out for upcoming newsletters. Rabbi Dini Lewidis is going to be our teacher next month. And then the Hinda Institute is going to talk to us about the consequences of having a family member in prison. And then our Kala is on June 1st, and that's going to be Rabbi and Professor Andrea Weiss from E2C. So
She'll be here in person.
she'll be here in person. That will be at North Shore Congregation Israel. Thank you so much, Rabbi Rossoff. You
Thank you
gave
for
us
the honor.
a lot to think about. And what day is it? It's Wednesday, very early Shabbat Shalom, I
Shabbat
suppose.
shalom.
But good to see everybody.
Hump day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.